What is it about the RMS Titanic that so fascinates? She's become a shorthand for overconfidence, greed, and disaster, a symbol for the end of the Edwardian era. Films have been produced retelling her story, some more accurate than others. Books have been written about her, and her name is evoked in everyday conversation, moving the deck chairs on the Titanic, for example. She is surrounded by myths. Take, for example, the story of an ancient Egyptian mummy being transported in the Titanic's hold. A mummy, moreover, with a curse to which the liner supposedly fell victim. It is nonsense, of course. There is no record of an ancient Egyptian mummy aboard. The Titanic was a passenger ship before the age of air travel, before the First World War redrew the map of Europe. She sank on her maiden voyage, even though she had been described as practically unsinkable. She subsequently became a byword for comfort, luxury, and disaster. But the Titanic and her sinking have a mystique shared with no other maritime disaster. Other ships have sunk, so why do we always turn to the Titanic? Here we have a rudimentary model of the Titanic. Not quite on a par with Titanic Honour and Glory, but it shall serve. For those who like to know these things, it is this length of railing here that was recently found to have fallen off. In its day, it was a portable length for the use in port. In this video, we will ponder over the mystique of the Titanic and attempt to decode what makes this ship and her story so fascinating. What fuels this fascination? Perhaps it is the sense of unfinished business, the maiden voyage of a ship that was destined to never reach the end of her voyage. Perhaps it is the symbolism or the archetypes the ship and her sinking represents. Perhaps it is the sense of mystery, of some hidden aspect we suspect is there, just out of sight, waiting to be uncovered. Ships sink, at times with a great loss of life, but it is the Titanic that holds our attention. Walter Lord, author of A Night to Remember, wondered about the Titanic's mystique in his introduction to Dr. Robert D. Ballard's The Discovery of the Titanic. Surmising a universal appeal, he pointed towards the progression of almost any tragedy in our lives, from initial disbelief to growing uneasiness to final total awareness. We are all familiar with this sequence, and we watch it unfold again and again on the Titanic, always in slow motion. In The Titanic, The Full Story of a Tragedy, Michael Davey wrote, "Some disasters are undeniably acts of God, but the Titanic's sinking has always seemed ambiguous. Although caused by an iceberg, it was also man-made, the result of the state of mind, grandiose, avaricious, and self-confident, of the British and American magnates and engineers who conceived and built the ship." And here is a particularly modern theme, that of misplaced trust in the professional class. So many people in the Titanic's story who ought to have known better failed to know better, to the detriment of the blameless. Davey, though, continues. A further reason why this particular disaster is of permanent interest is that it happened slowly, unlike a jet airliner crash. No one expected it. Everyone on board, whether rich or poor, passenger or crew, was confronted with a sudden test and given time to fumble or meet it. Her older sister ship, the Olympic, was the first to win the glory of being the biggest and most comfortable liner in the world. The Titanic had the improvements developed from the lessons of the Olympic, but she was the second ship, not the first. She left Southampton not even full, in spite of a coal strike limiting the options for oceanic carriage. The Titanic sailed in the shadow of her sister. If events had turned out differently, then perhaps this would have remained so. History, though, had other ideas. There were 3 ships of the Olympic class. The first 2, the Olympic and the Titanic, were closest to each other in appearance. The third ship was greatly modified as she was built. It seemed she was to be called the Gigantic, which would be in keeping with a classical theme. The Olympian gods overthrew the Titans, and the Titans overthrew the giants. Of course, White Star seems to have thought better of it. After all, their competitors were building even larger ships, such as Cunard's Aquitania, and so they named the third ship Britannic instead. The Olympic-class design of the first 2 ships was deceptively simple. A 3-island design, a forecastle, a bridge deck, and a poop deck, separated by 2 well decks, 2 masts, 4 funnels, and clean lines. Their bridges were not elevated above the boat deck, nor was there a large structure astern like the Lusitania. Between the Olympic and the Titanic, there were 4 external differences. First, the A-deck covered promenade. On the Titanic, the front half of this promenade was enclosed, reportedly as a result of complaints about sea spray aboard the Olympic. This enclosing on the Titanic happened during her fitting out phase, which is why, at her launching, the A-deck promenade was not enclosed. Another change made at the fitting out phase affected the deck below, B-deck, and this is our second difference. On the Olympic, we find this covered promenade aft. On the Titanic, this length of second-class promenade was shorter to accommodate the first-class Café Parisien to starboard and an expanded first-class restaurant to port. Third difference. Look at these B-deck windows on the Olympic. They are very regular, and the reason is that this is an enclosed promenade. The Titanic did not have an enclosed promenade on B-deck, but instead extra staterooms were added at the fitting out stage. The only surviving segments of the promenade were for the 2 millionaires' suites. The suites themselves reportedly cost £870 at the height of the season, at least according to the Times newspaper. The fourth difference may be questioned, for the only way to know absolutely would be to use some sort of ground-penetrating radar under the stern counter of the wreck. It is the question of the ship's central propeller. Thanks to the German Air Force, the plans for the Titanic, held at Harland and Wolff, were lost during the Second World War. What we know is that the Olympic had a 4-bladed central screw, and the Britannic had, or has, present tense, a 4-bladed central screw. It has always been assumed that the Titanic's central screw was, or is, also 4-bladed. However, this assumption was recently challenged, so perhaps the Titanic's central screw was, or is, 3-bladed instead. If so, we have a fourth difference between the Olympic and the Titanic. There was also a fifth. The portholes, or to be more accurate, the scuttles, on the sea-deck port side of the forecastle were regular on the Olympic, but irregular on the Titanic. The Olympic was virtually identical to the Titanic, but she has not become iconic, so the Titanic's mystique does not lie entirely with her clean, elegant appearance. If this was so, then the Olympic, being so close in appearance, would have enjoyed some of this mystique. She, however, did not sink. The Britannic did sink, the victim of a mine in the Aegean Sea during the First World War. However, she was not identical to her sisters. having been greatly modified from the original. And of course, she sank in wartime. In all the narratives of those final hours of agony, there is practically unambiguous testimony to the noble spirit of chivalry which prevailed. With scarcely an exception, the men stood aside and surrendered the one chance of life for women and children, until the safety of every one of these had been assured. Then, with that calm resignation in the face of certain death which is the mark of the highest courage, and to the music of the band, to whose eternal honour be it recorded, the majority awaited the final plunge, or flung themselves in a last vain hope into the dark waters. Perhaps the source of the mystique lies in the nature of the sinking itself. The Titanic remained afloat for 2 hours and 40 minutes after her deadly encounter with the iceberg. That this is a long motion picture length is a coincidence, but it does offer a canvas of mounting doom for any writer or dramatist, complete with suspenseful countdown. And the great ship, so full of light and warmth and comforts, remained on a relatively even keel for much of that time, sinking, to use Walter Lord's phrase, in slow motion. With time to consider the situation and appreciate the danger, as Michael Davey pointed out, any man might be tempted to board one of those lifeboats. It is a test of character. Some, like Benjamin Guggenheim, passed. We are dressed in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen, whilst others, such as J. Bruce Ismay, failed. Yet it is easy to sit before a monitor or a smartphone and think smugly that it is a test we too would pass. This is the privilege of comfort long after the fact. We are not aboard a sinking ship. The passengers and crew had 2 hours and 40 minutes to consider, to weigh their chances, to stare at death's approach, and all this in the darkness of a cold night. That is a long time, so long that it might well break even the bravest and most self-sacrificing. Some of us wonder what we would do in such a situation. Imagine, your options are stark. You can drown, you can freeze to death, or you can be battered to death against the ship's hull as she sinks, and all the time you face the icy darkness and the slowly increasing sound of seawater getting closer and closer. The darkness itself might break one's will. And yet you have a single option for escape, a lifeboat. For the rest of your life you will have to live with your decision. For the rest of your life you will be exposed to the contempt of others. Do you risk it and live dishonoured, or do you make the honourable choice and die? I like not such grinning honour as Sir Walter hath. Give me life, which if I can save, so. If not, honour comes unlooked for, and there's an end. It is the test of chivalry, and if the sinking had been quick, then this long, long terror would not be a factor. Another aspect of the Titanic worth remembering lies with her status as a passenger liner. Her passengers might easily be people we know, or even you and I. When the Hood sank, she took with her 2,000 men, leaving only 3 survivors. But the Hood was a battle cruiser, manned by sailors of the Royal Navy. Unless you are a military member of the Brotherhood of the Sea, then their world of drill and guns, steel and war will be alien to you. I'm reluctant to use the word relatable, but it does hold true in the case of a passenger ship. Like any premier passenger ship in her day, the Titanic carried a cross-section of society, and as such, her sinking took with her a cross-section of victims. The question of percentages haunts this issue. Martin H. Leveson puts the numbers into stark contrast. Of the first-class passengers, 60% were saved. Of the second class, 42% were saved. Of the third class, 25% were saved. And of the crew, only 22% lived to see the dawn. it seems we have another archetype. The millionaires survive whilst the poor perish. The US Senate investigation numbers gives us the total of first class who died, 130, 119 men and 11 women and children. The total of second class who died, 166, 142 men and 24 women and children. The total of third class who died, 536, 417 men and 119 women and children. The total of crew who died, 685, 682 men and 3 women. The highest death toll was not amongst the third class passengers, which itself was high, but the crew, specifically male crew members. They are followed by third class men, then second class men, then both first class men and third class women and children, then second class women and children, then first class women and children, and finally female crew members. And yet there is another way of looking at these numbers, and this illustrates something curious that few give much consideration to. The total of first class saved, 199, 54 men and 145 women and children. The total of second class saved, 119, 15 men and 104 women and children. The total of third class saved, 174, 69 men and 105 women and children. The total of crew saved, 214, 194 men and 20 women. The distribution of classes across the survivors is surprisingly even. Amongst the saved, the highest number is the male crew members, followed by first class women and children, then third class women and children, then second class women and children, then third class men, then first class men, then female crew members, and then second class men. It is interesting to note that more third class passengers were saved than second class passengers. And if you were a second class male, you had pretty much had it. Only 15 survived. More crew and third class people died because there were more crew and third class people aboard. At the same time, there were too few lifeboats, and the boat deck was shared between the first class and second class open promenades. As an archetype for class snobbery, we expect locked gates and millionaire exclusive boats. Think of that dreadful James Cameron film. Push back the curtain of myth and the reality revealed is more complex. We read into the disaster our own obsessions, and so the Titanic has become a meanings magnet. Consider the differences between the film adaptation of A Night to Remember, SOS Titanic, and that Cameron film, a film in which one of the few saving graces is the accuracy of the ship herself. The Titanic and her sinking has now become a brand, and these days the Titanic means the movie, not the historical event. Cameron's movie, in a nutshell, has become the baseline for the brand. Nowhere was this better illustrated than by the sinking of Italian cruise liner Costa Concordia in January 2012. Many media reports drew unprompted parallels with the Titanic, Cameron's Titanic, in their accounts of the tragedy, as did the passengers themselves. And seemingly as this seems, the ultimate paradox perhaps is that when Cameron's blockbuster was re-released in 3D to coincide with the centenary of the sinking, many teenage cinemagoers were unaware that the movie was based on a historical event. The continuance of the Titanic brand and the industry feeding from it hangs in the uncertain balance of proud time. But the romance, the glamour, the mystery and the spell that charms whoever encounters the ship and her story remains. There can be no industry and no brand if there is no mystique. So, what is it about the RMS Titanic that so fascinates? This is a question a paltry fellow such as I cannot answer, but perhaps it lies in the Titanic as an archetype. All sinking liners after 1912 and all before 1912 have, from our point of view, become variations on her theme. Whilst he was writing about literature, the late George Steiner might as well have been writing about the Titanic disaster. Above all, the meaning striven towards will never be one which exegesis, commentary, translation, paraphrase, psychoanalytic or sociological decoding can ever exhaust, can ever define as total. Only weak poems can be exhaustively interpreted or understood. Only in trivial or opportunistic texts is the sum of significance that of the parts. The Titanic disaster is the perfect illustration of an archetype in which no one interpretation or attempt at decoding can ever be the final answer. The ship was elegant and clean in design. Her sinking was slow, indeed motion picture epic length, slow enough for drama and the test of chivalry. And she was a passenger liner, aboard which ordinary people like you and I, were passengers.